Have you ever reached a point where someone's behavior left you speechless? Not because you didn't know what to say, but because you realized saying anything wouldn't change a thing? Maybe it was a friend who constantly took advantage of your kindness. Or one of your grown children who only reaches out when they need something, never just to check on you. Or maybe it was someone who talked down to you, dismissed your feelings, or acted like your presence didn't matter. And there you were, holding back all the things you wanted to say, but didn't. Because something in you whispered, "Don't waste your breath." If you've ever felt that, I want you to know, you're not alone. And more importantly, that moment of silence wasn't weakness. It was strength beginning to bloom. As women over 60, we've lived through enough to know that not every battle deserves our energy. Not every disrespect needs a loud reply. Sometimes the most powerful move we can make is the one we don't explain. The silent shift. The quiet goodbye. The calm refusal to participate in someone else's chaos. That's where your power lives. Today, I want to talk with you about those silent moves, the ones that don't come with fireworks, but leave a lasting mark. The ones that make people pause and realize, maybe too late, that they misjudged you, disrespected you, underestimated you. We're going to talk about how you can move with grace, strength, and dignity, and leave regret echoing in the spaces where others once took you for granted. Let's start with something simple, but so often overlooked: silence. There's a deep kind of power in silence. Not the silence that comes from being silenced, but the kind you choose. The silence that says, "I've said enough." That silence is not passive. It's purposeful. It's a withdrawal of access. It's you deciding that your voice, your time, and your presence are too precious to be wasted on someone who refuses to value them. See, when someone disrespects you, their biggest expectation is your reaction. They want to see you flustered, hurt, angry. Because if they can get a reaction out of you, they still feel in control. But when you don't give them that reaction, when you meet their chaos with calm, their disrespect with silence, that's when the game changes. You don't have to yell to make a statement. You don't need to explain your boundaries to make them real. You don't have to post about your growth or defend your decisions. The people who dismissed you will feel it, not because you told them, but because you stopped showing up for them the way you used to. And that leads us into something even more powerful. What happens when you choose to grow quietly? There's something so beautiful about leveling up in silence. When you start to focus inward, reading more, walking more, eating better, praying more, spending time in peace, you begin to shift. You don't have to announce your healing for it to be real. You don't have to prove to anyone that you're doing better. Your energy begins to speak before your mouth ever does. People begin to notice. Maybe it's in the way you carry yourself. Maybe it's how you respond with less urgency, less drama. Maybe it's the way you smile, not to impress, but because you're genuinely at peace. And those who once took your presence for granted suddenly don't know where they stand anymore. That's what happens when you stop trying to explain yourself. You give people space to feel the distance. And often it's in that silence, that absence, that they begin to regret how they treated you. Let me tell you something. Your presence is a gift. Not everyone deserves access to it. When you're always available, always picking up the phone, always saying yes, always showing up even when you're tired, it teaches people that your energy is limitless, that you don't mind being used, that you'll always be there, no matter how they treat you. But the moment you pull back, not angrily, not with a grand speech, just quietly, you begin to rewrite that story. You begin to remind people that kindness is not the same as weakness, that being loving doesn't mean being taken advantage of, that your silence is not empty, it's full of intention. And when that happens, people feel it. They start to wonder why you don't respond like you used to, why your messages are shorter, why your voice doesn't carry the same eagerness. That wondering, that shift in their comfort, is the beginning of their reflection, and often their regret. Because here's the truth. People remember how you made them feel, but they also remember how it felt when you stopped. Now, I know this isn't easy, especially if you're someone who has always tried to be the peacemaker. If you were raised to put others first, to be polite, to keep the family together, to avoid making waves. But let me ask you this. Where has that gotten you when people treated you poorly? Being the bigger person doesn't mean shrinking yourself. Being kind doesn't mean being silent when you're hurting. And choosing peace doesn't mean staying where you're not respected. It means choosing you, choosing your energy, choosing your joy. And yes, there will be moments when it feels lonely. When you wonder if you made the right decision by pulling back, by not answering, by not explaining. But those moments are short. What lasts is the peace that follows. The clarity, the energy you regain when you stop trying to manage other people's emotions and start caring for your own. You may notice that as you grow, your circle gets smaller. Some people will fade away because you stopped making all the effort. Let them. That's not loss, it's alignment. You're not pushing people out, you're rising, and not everyone is willing to rise with you. And that's okay. What matters is that you continue. That you keep choosing peace over petty arguments, growth over gossip, stillness over drama. That you keep walking, even if it's alone for a while. Because the version of you that is waiting on the other side is so worth it. And when you get there, when you've healed just a little more, smiled a little easier, walked with a little more confidence, you'll look back and realize they didn't break you. They reminded you of your power. They reminded you of who you are. So if someone has disrespected you, dismissed you, or made you feel small, don't fight them for understanding. Don't chase closure or try to prove your worth. Just pause, breathe, and start making those quiet, deliberate moves that shift the energy back into your hands. Because silence isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And when you use it with purpose, it becomes the loudest thing in the room. There's something incredibly powerful about staying calm when someone expects you to break. You've probably experienced it before. Someone says something hurtful, something that digs a little too deep, maybe even tries to provoke you. And you can feel the heat rising in your chest, the words rushing to the tip of your tongue. You want to speak up, defend yourself, put them in their place. And yet, something stops you. Not because you're afraid, not because you're unsure, but because deep down, you know your peace is worth more than that moment of proving a point. That's not weakness. That's control. When we're younger, it can feel like every disagreement deserves a reply. Every insult demands a response. But as we grow, especially as we enter this season of life, we begin to see the bigger picture. We learn that not every door needs to be opened, and not every battle needs to be fought. Some things and some people are simply not worth disturbing our peace over. You begin to realize how sacred your energy is. How limited your emotional bandwidth becomes when you're balancing your health, your routines, your family, your quiet joys. And suddenly, shouting back or writing that long message or making that angry phone call just feels like noise. A waste. An echo that doesn't deserve your voice. Calm is your power. When you stay composed, you're not just preserving your dignity, you're confusing the very people who tried to shake it. They expected you to react, to scream, to explain. And when you don't, when you simply blink, breathe, and move on, it leaves them standing in the ashes of their own chaos, wondering what just happened. That calmness, it's disarming. And over time, it becomes unforgettable. Because while they're stuck replaying the moment, you're already 2 steps ahead, tending to your garden, reading your book, taking a walk, laughing at something on TV. You've moved on, not because you didn't care, but because you finally cared enough about yourself. Now, let's talk about boundaries. Not the kind you announce on social media or declare in long emotional speeches. I'm talking about quiet, steady boundaries. The kind that show up in how you live. The kind that need no explanation. There's a certain strength that comes with simply deciding what you will and will not allow in your life anymore. Maybe you stop answering the phone when that one friend calls to complain about the same things over and over. Maybe you say no when someone asks you to do something that drains you. Maybe you just stop showing up to gatherings where you feel invisible. You don't owe anyone a story. You don't have to justify your peace. Setting boundaries doesn't make you cold. It makes you clear. And clarity can be uncomfortable for other people, especially the ones who benefited from your lack of it. When you stop making yourself available to their convenience, they start to feel the shift. Not because you told them, but because they can feel the access slipping away. And that's when the regret begins to settle in. People often don't value what they always assumed would be there. They don't question the comfort until it disappears. They don't notice your generosity until it dries up. And they don't respect your kindness until it's no longer given freely. But here's what's important. You didn't make those changes out of bitterness. You made them out of self-respect. You realized that the version of you who tolerated everything, who explained herself endlessly, who tried to keep the peace at the expense of her own, that version of you wasn't thriving. She was tired. She was stretched thin. She was surviving. And now, you're choosing differently. There's no need to slam doors or make dramatic exits. Just step back, quietly, slowly, and keep your focus on the life you're building, not the people who didn't appreciate it when you were standing right in front of them. Your disappearance doesn't have to be loud. In fact, the quiet kind leaves the biggest echo. When someone looks around and realizes you're no longer there, and they can't quite remember when you stopped answering, when you stopped giving, when you started choosing yourself, it catches them off guard. It forces them to sit with their own actions. Without your voice to argue with, without your presence to lean on, without your forgiveness to fall back on, they have nothing but themselves. That silence becomes their mirror. And the best part? You're not waiting around for them to figure it out. You're already elsewhere. Growing, healing, laughing again, making your home feel like a sanctuary, spending time with people who lift you up instead of drain you. Maybe learning something new, maybe traveling, maybe just sitting quietly with your tea in the morning light and realizing, I made it through. And if you do get that text, or that phone call, or hear that someone didn't understand why you disappeared, don't feel guilty. Growth isn't always comfortable for the people who never expected you to outgrow them. You see, real growth doesn't need an audience. It happens when no one is looking, when you're saying no more often, when you're waking up without the heaviness in your chest, when you catch yourself smiling for no reason at all. That's the glow-up they didn't see coming. And the fact that you didn't need to shout it from the rooftops, that's what makes it hit even harder. Because while some people are still caught in old patterns, waiting for drama, craving attention, trying to push your buttons, you've stepped into a new chapter. One where your peace is protected, your energy is guarded, and your love, your time, your spirit, reserved for those who see it as the blessing it is. That's the quiet kind of revenge. Not petty, not loud, just powerful, graceful, solid. The kind of response that leaves people reflecting long after you've stopped thinking about them. And the beautiful thing? You didn't do it to make them regret anything. You did it because you finally realized you deserved better. You made a decision, not a scene. And that, my friend, is unforgettable. You know, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to raise your voice, but to raise your standards. There comes a moment in every woman's life when she realizes that explaining herself, justifying her feelings, or trying to get someone to understand her worth, it's just not worth the energy anymore. You reach a point where peace becomes more important than proving anything. And that's when everything starts to change. Because you stop looking for closure in conversations that only leave you empty. You stop checking your phone, hoping for a message that never comes. You stop giving pieces of yourself to people who wouldn't even notice if you disappeared. And instead, you begin to reclaim your time, your spirit, your future. This isn't about being cold or shutting people out. It's about stepping into the kind of self-respect that doesn't need validation, the kind that doesn't beg for an apology or chase after explanations. You start to understand that when someone chooses to disrespect you, whether through words, neglect, manipulation, or plain disregard, it says more about them than it ever did about you. And you don't have to stick around to hear the excuses. You don't need to stay in the room to prove your point. Sometimes the most dignified response is to simply leave. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in clarity. Because when you walk away from what no longer serves you, without a scene, without an argument, you leave behind something more powerful than any final word: your absence. Let me tell you, your absence can echo louder than anything you've ever said. It lingers in the spaces you used to fill, in the support you used to offer, in the presence you once gave so freely. And when you stop showing up for those who expected you to always be there, no matter how they treated you, that silence becomes deafening. And here's the thing, while they sit in that silence trying to figure out what happened, you're already building. You're already blooming. Maybe you've picked up a new hobby you'd been putting off for years. Maybe you're finally giving yourself the rest you were too busy to take. Maybe you're finding joy in solitude, in walks around your neighborhood, in journaling, in music that stirs something deep in your soul. Whatever it is, you're not staying stuck in the past. You're not dwelling. You're evolving. You're putting your energy into growth, not revenge. Now, a lot of people misunderstand this part. They think if you don't clap back, if you don't teach them a lesson, then you're letting them off easy. But real power isn't in trying to punish someone who hurt you. It's in rising so far above their behavior that they can't even reach you anymore. Because revenge might feel satisfying in the moment, but it ties you to the very pain you're trying to leave behind. It keeps you looking back when your future is begging you to look forward. Let karma handle what words cannot. Life has a way of evening things out, quietly, without warning, and often when people least expect it. And while they're still stuck in the same cycles, gossiping, arguing, trying to poke at old wounds, you're already living in a different world. A world you created with intention. A world full of light and grace. A world where you are no longer the version of you they once mistreated. Because that version of you, the one who tolerated it all, who smiled through the pain, who kept the peace at any cost, she's gone. In her place stands a woman who knows her worth, who protects her peace, who chooses her battles with wisdom, not emotion. And as time passes, something interesting begins to happen. Those who once overlooked you, disrespected you, or dismissed you, they notice. Maybe they see it in a photo. Maybe they hear it from someone else. Maybe it's just the way your name comes up and the energy is different now. But they notice. They notice that you're glowing, that you're no longer circling around their life like a satellite, that your light is coming from within, and it has nothing to do with them. And that's when the regret sets in. Not because you forced it, but because they realize they lost access to something rare, something gentle, wise, and strong, something they didn't recognize when it was right in front of them. You didn't punish them. You didn't shame them. You just stopped showing up, and you began showing up for yourself instead. That's what makes the impact so powerful. Because anyone can scream, anyone can argue, but not everyone can walk away with grace and keep walking without ever looking back. It takes courage to choose peace in a world that feeds off drama. It takes maturity to not respond when someone is trying to provoke you. And it takes deep, unshakable self-love to stay grounded when everything inside you wants to shout, "Look what you've done." But when you stay calm, when you hold your dignity, when you allow silence to carry your message, you become unforgettable. So if you're sitting here today wondering whether you did the right thing by stepping back, by choosing yourself, by closing a door that no longer felt right, I want you to know, yes, you did the right thing. You're not being dramatic. You're not overreacting. You're honoring the woman you've become. And that version of you, she deserves peace. She deserves relationships that feel safe, conversations that nourish her, moments that heal instead of hurt. You're not missing out on anything that was meant for you. The people who are meant to walk with you in this season of life will never make you feel like you're too much or not enough. They will meet you with the same respect, depth, and honesty you offer them. And until then, silence is a perfectly acceptable answer. You don't owe the world your energy. You don't owe your time to people who treated it carelessly. You don't need to keep explaining, defending, or proving yourself. All you need is to continue rising. And you are rising, even if it doesn't feel big yet. Even if the steps are small and quiet. Every time you choose peace over pressure, you rise. Every time you stay calm in the face of chaos, you rise. Every time you say no to what no longer serves you, you rise. Let that be your answer to anyone who doubted your strength. Let your glow speak louder than your words ever could. Because in the end, those who disrespected you won't remember the last thing you said. They'll remember the silence that followed. They'll remember the strength it took to walk away. And most of all, they'll remember the version of you they never got to meet. The one who finally chose herself.